coming up. Here we go. Woohoo! Ready to roll. Here we go. Somebody's logging in with a phone. I love it. Get everybody logged in. Ample time. Oh my gosh, Diana. Hello. How are you? Good to see you.
I'm so happy that I could pop in for a little while. When I saw that Greg was going to be on, I thought maybe 30 minutes because I have a meeting, but it's great to be here.
Oh,
awesome.
awesome. Oh, all right. Well, we're just going to get things going. I'm not going to spend too much time doing my usual hi, hellos, shout outs, because I have a feeling everybody's really here to hear from Craig. And so I don't want to take away his time, right? So I do want to give it a minute though, because sometimes people don't really set their watch to coffee connection, right? I think they should, but they don't always do that. Oh my gosh, Christine, good to see you too. You've been doing all kinds of stuff. It's amazing. I love following everybody. All right, we got a couple more jumping in here. And while we're doing that, one of the things that I want to make mention of, because sometimes I forget to do this, next week we have Kimberly Penn. So there's been a lot of questions and talk about, promoting your business and such like that. And she's going to be talking about business strategies. So next week is Kimberly Penn, and we're really excited to have her on the Coffee Connection next week. So, all right, don't forget, we're here about networking. So please use the chat. Put your information in there. Look, Christine, she's already got one going on. Thank you very much. I love it. It's so good to see everybody, and I love our Tuesday mornings. So one of the things I want to do, though, is get things going. So I'm going to, I don't really think our guest speaker needs an introduction. Oh, wait, I still have more people to let in. So if I get distracted, I'm sorry. But we're super excited to have Greg Reverdiau here today with us. And as you know, he's with the Pilot Institute, and he has a phenomenal program for training and so much more. And it's super exciting to hear from him because he's such a subject matter expert. And I know everybody is here to ask questions, learn about things about the drone industry. And we have a few topics that I want to make sure that we cover. And so feel free to put questions into the chat, but I want to make sure that we cover, finding flying locations. I was just talking to Greg, and I know that's one of the key things that I found very, very helpful with this site. But we also want to maybe cover waiver process, FRIA, mode ID, film permits, getting model releases and such like that. So we hope to cover all this today. There's a lot happening. So with that, I'm going to make sure that everybody's in here, and it looks like we got everybody in here. Greg, thank you. I'm going to make you spotlight. I am so honored to have you on our show today, and we're super excited. We're going to be letting more people in as you get started here, but as usual, I would like to kick things off with, tell us how you got into the drone industry. Right?
Oh, that's a long story. Well, it's actually not a long story, but well, it's funny, my background is flying airplanes and teaching people how to fly airplanes. And at one point I was at a flight school, and I saw other people that started to create flight training programs for drones and started to teach the drone stuff. That was before Part 107 was a thing. And there was a lot of requirements at the time for having an actual pilot certificate, but you also needed some training to just fly drones. And I remember telling my boss at the time, I said, I really want to create a drone program here. And this was 2012, 2013. And he said, no, we fly our airplanes from the airplane. That's what he told me. He was a former Navy guy and a former astronaut, actually. And he just didn't believe in drones. And I said, well, you know what? As soon as I left the school and I went to another job, I decided to really get into drones because I saw a big opportunity there, and I thought this was going to be the future of aviation. So short story, is I just saw it happening and then jumped on the opportunity to do it.
Awesome. And we're so glad that you did.
Well, thank you.
So I know there's a lot of information in your websites and everything, but I am very fond of one particular part about where can I fly? It seems to be a question that so many people have. And I am constantly going back to that section that you've created. I found it so helpful. Tell us about that section of finding locations to fly.
Yeah, that's the wiki. I'm putting a link right now in the comments. We keep getting students, or we kept getting students over and over again that would say, hey, can I fly here, or can I fly here, or is it legal? And as you know, the FAA has control of the airspace, but the FAA doesn't really have control of the land in itself. So what we would see is people that would basically just restrict land access to drone pilots, and you can't fly your drone from there. But it's not really on the FAA apps. It's not on before you fly. And so we spend 6 months collecting data of all the different local municipalities, states, and everything. And we put that on this website here that I just linked. And we call it a wiki page because that's what it is. Just like Wikipedia, you can have people submit their own information. So if you know in your city that there's a restriction that we haven't found, and I know there is some that we haven't found, then you can give it to us and we'll put it on the website. So it's user maintained in a sense. So that way we make sure that it's always current and people can go in there, and they can also find cool places to fly in certain states and certain cities. We've created a cool little area. It tells you if you need airspace approval to fly in that area. So we spend a ton of time on this, and it's working really well. We have a lot of people asking us to add content and just keep it up to date.
So I have used it so many times because I'm traveling all the time. I'm currently traveling now. I'm heading to Texas. And so I get into these areas that I'm not familiar with, and it's such a valuable resource. So I'm glad you put that in there. And I love that it's being updated all the time.
Yep. That's the big key, right? Is keeping it updated. That's the difficult thing to do. Either you need somebody on staff full time to do that and keep looking for different places, or you use the community to do it. And we have enough people in the community now to do that.
Awesome. So looking over at my chat, I do see that a lot of links have already been put in there. Thank you, Greg, for posting that one. And then Adrian, he's also on the call here, and he's posted an event that he has coming up North Texas on April 29th. So thank you, Adrian, for sharing that. And so I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to share any questions that you might have. So don't forget to put those into the chat, and I will be monitoring those. So when we were just discussing, Greg, when we were just discussing about finding locations, one of the key things about that Wikipedia thing or wiki that you put in there is you actually shared what airspace it was in, which was fantastic. And so there are certain locations that need a waiver. Can you dive deeper into the waiver process, if it's through the lands or the drone zone? Can you dive a little deeper into that?
Yeah, for sure. So there's two different types of airspace, I'm going to say, out there. There's that needs approval. You've got your LANS approved airports, and then you've got your non-LANS approved airports. Typically, if you fly in LANS approved airports, you just use your typical app like Aloft Air Control or whatever your favorite is. And then you can get approval pretty much immediately to fly in that airspace if you fly under the grid number. So that little grid, it says 400, 200. That's the maximum altitude that you can get auto approval. Now, if you want to fly above those numbers, or if you want to fly in one of those red grid, the LANS approved ones are green, the non-LANS approved ones are red. So if you want to fly in the red grid or above grid numbers, then you will have to get further coordination. That's the way the FAA calls it. And then you can do that on the FAA Drone Zone website. Some apps will allow you to do it as well through their apps. I personally prefer to go on the drone zone because it goes directly to the FAA and it's nice and easy. Well, I don't know if it's easy, but the the platform is fairly simple to fill out your information. And the one tip I would give people is don't just put the request in there without any additional information, because the FAA is going to look at this and say, well, I don't know what you're going to do to make sure that you're safe. What I tell people is when you submit one of these applications, you need to convince the FAA that your flight is going to be safe. What are you doing? What steps are you taking to make sure that if you fly close to an airport that you can fly safely? So I usually tell them I'm familiar with the airport. I know the traffic pattern. I know I can listen on the radio using a portable radio. And then I can get away from people if they get too close to us. I'm going to have a visual observer. So I'm trying to give them as many things that I can to make them feel good about the fact that I'm going to conduct that flight safely. And that's really the bottom line. So don't forget to put that little additional information at the end of your application. When they ask you how you're going to do this safely, that's when you tell them. And then from here, if it's approved, by the way, give them enough time. I've gotten these as early as 3 days, but sometimes it takes a little longer. The FAA says it can take up to 90 days, although that's not really the case anymore. It used to be a long time ago, but not anymore. And so give them enough time to go through your process and then approve it. And once you do, you'll get that little approval in drone zone. It's going to give you some conditions. Make sure you follow the conditions that are in here, and then you can fly safely. And then I will add to that, which is also something that gets confusing for students, is if you fly a DJI drone, for example, you also need to get approval from DJI. DJI approval is not FAA approval. FAA approval is not DJI approval. If anything, you need to make sure 100% you get the FAA approval first, and then you can ask DJI if it's restricted, if they're restricted to fly in that area. And yes, sometimes DJI restricts you, but the FAA doesn't, which doesn't make sense to me, but that's the way it is. And sometimes it's the opposite. The FAA restricts you, but not DJI. So make sure you get both of them if you fly a DJI drone.
I know so many people that have done the DJI and thought, oh, I'm all good to fly.
Yep,
Yes.
we get that every day, every single day.
Yeah. We do have a question here into our chat. I have a question on how to start getting job or career in the drone field after getting your Part 107.
Oh, that's a good question, Bailey. The thing I always tell people when they want to get into this industry is a drone is a tool that you're going to use to collect data, right? So find something, find a field. There's a lot of different verticals, industries that are using drones. Find something that one interests you, and two, that you may have a background in, so that you can utilize the drones more easily. Flying the drone in itself is not the complicated part. Collecting the data and then analyzing the data typically is where, you know, the money is at, or where the interest is at for a lot of people. So make sure that you go into one of these industries that you're really comfortable with, or an industry that you're really interested in learning more. But short of that, that's really, you know, the way to go.
And we have, before we move on, I have one more question that looks like it popped up from Lorenzo. Besides looking at VFR sectionals, do you have any suggestions for online apps for low altitude military training routes? That's a great question. I have had that as well.
Yep, that is a great question. And the answer is, unfortunately, VFR sectionals are pretty much the reference for that kind of flying at the moment. The downside is that the sectional charts are not very detailed, so you could be a mile off from each side of those VFR routes, right? Those military training routes. So other than trying to steer pretty clear of them and then keeping an eye out, it's very difficult because they'll be flying low and then flying at very fast speed. And yeah, there's no easy answer, unfortunately.
I think you just made a very valid point, though. They're off by a mile or so. I literally had a situation on Sunday where I'm not in the area, but boy, they just came low and fast. And so just giving yourself that buffer and knowing it. And so awesome. All right. So let's move on to a question that I know everybody has been asking about, and I've seen some information coming out. And can you tell us a little bit about FRIA? What it is, what it means to us as a drone operator?
Yep, FRIAs. So that's related to remote ID. That's the FAA recognized identification area. Yeah, FRIA.
You didn't
And
know you got quizzed.
That was
I call it the
impressive,
fryer.
Greg.
Yeah. So the when remote ID goes into effect this September 16 of this year, everybody's going to have a way to send remote ID transmitted to the world, right? Broadcasted to the world. And that's going to be done either using a standard drone that's going to have remote ID in it. We've seen a lot of them now coming out with remote ID. It's actually a requirement from the FAA that all new drones come up with remote ID in the drone in itself. Or you can use a little module that you can put on top of your drone. It's a little dongle, and then that's going to broadcast remote ID. And then if you don't want to have remote ID, well, the FAA says, well, you can fly, but you're going to have to fly in those specific areas, the FRIAs, and that's a remote ID free area if you want. You won't have to have a drone equipped with remote ID. At the moment, there's none that have been approved, but I know that the FAA was waiting to have CBOs, the community-based organizations, approved, because most of the stuff will be going through the application process will be going through the CBOs in order to get FRIAs approved. So what we're seeing right now is I'm sure there's been people that have submitted some FRIAs for approval, and we're just waiting for the FAA to approve them. And then they'll be visible on, where, but my guess is going to be on the UAS facility map, which is where the FAA has the LANS zones and all that stuff. So you'll be able to see those FRIAs in there, and then you'll be able to go fly there if you want to, and then not have remote ID. And that's the only place where you'll be able to fly without remote ID.
All right. Christine asked kind of a fun question here for you. What is Greg's most excited? What are you most excited about? Or, okay, what are you dreading when it comes to consumer drones, and where we're going with it?
That's a great question. What I'm most excited about is the new platforms that we're seeing coming out with the advent of new battery technology. For example, we've seen such a big jump. If you remember a couple of years ago, a drone could fly 20 minutes in the air. Now you can fly 45 minutes. Not everywhere, but in most cases you can with the more dense batteries. So I'm kind of excited about seeing the ability to fly longer with those drones. What I'm not so excited about, that's interesting. I would say the slowing down, or seemingly the slowing down of releases of new drones. A couple of years ago, you'd see a new drone coming out every couple of months from manufacturers. Other than DJI last year, there really hasn't been any new drones that came out from a big manufacturer. You look at Autel, they came up with a new drone finally this year, but there was nothing last year. Skydio hasn't come up with a new drone in a while. And so you see all the bigger manufacturers that are slowing down with their releases. And DJI is pretty much left running by themselves. So I wish there was a bit more competition, a bit more other manufacturers than DJI. Don't get me wrong, I love my DJI drone, but I would love to see other people. We all win when there is competition. Everybody gets better technology when we have competition. So yeah, that would be my answer.
All right. So looking on the horizon right there, I like it. You hit a key factor, batteries. That has been phenomenal, and what a game changer right there. Having the battery life. Yeah. Yep. So Paul has asked a question, and other than going through and reading it, can you just talk a little bit about flying over people? Such an important question. And so just could you encompass that a little bit for us, please?
Yeah, Paul is right. He says everybody flies over people. At the moment, flying over people is extremely, extremely limited by the FAA. There's only one way to fly over people, really, is to get a drone that's categorized, and that's only under Part 107, by the way. If you're a recreational pilot, you cannot fly. There's no path at the moment to fly over people as a recreational pilot. As a Part 107 pilot, you can fly using a Category 1, 2, 3, or 4 drone. Unfortunately, there is only one Category 3 drone that's approved right now by the FAA, no Category 2. Category 4 is going to be out of everybody's pocketbook, because it's going to be a very large drone that's approved by the FAA. Think about your drone delivery drone. That's what's going to be a Category 4. And then we're left with Category 1. So a Category 1, like Paul said, you need to have you need to have propellers that cannot cause laceration, which means that you need prop guards on top of the drone more than likely. And then if you put prop guards on most small drones, they're going to be over 250 grams or 0.55 pounds, which means that they're no longer category 1. So there's only a very handful of drones that are category 1 approved. We actually have one in the office. DJI came up with a Japanese version of their Mini 2 that was 199 grams. And then when you put the prop guards on top of it, it actually stays under 250 grams. So that is compliant. The downside is that the battery is very small because it's a 1-cell battery instead of a 2-cell battery. So you get about, well, where we are at altitude, we get about 5 minutes of flight time with it. So that's not much. But that's compliant. So if you wanted to fly over people, that's how you would do it. Now, there's another caveat on top of it. By the way, categorized drones flying over people, the most complicated regulation the FAA has ever come up with as far as drones are concerned. That's my personal opinion. Just an absolute mess to teach. Very, very difficult to teach. I have a cheat sheet on my desk that I actually use to make sure I say the right thing because there's just too many intricacies. But the category 1 drone, if you want to fly them over a large amount of people, you need to have remote ID. You can't have remote ID on the Mini 2 because it doesn't come with it. So you'd have to put a module on top of it, and the module would take it over 250 grams. So it's just this mind-blowing thing. You think you have the right drone to do everything, but at the moment you can't fly it over large groups of people. So if you see a video of somebody flying over a concert, typically it's going to be an illegal video unless they were able to get a waiver, which at the moment you can look up the waivers on the FAA website. Nobody has that kind of waiver. So yes, the things that we see online are not always an indication that you can do it legally and safely.
And Diana, she gave you the thumbs up on that. As far as it's very complicated. So
Yep.
I think it does take a spreadsheet because it is, you can hear, but you can't hear. There's this attached, but that is not, and blah, blah, blah. And so is there any, and I hate to put you on the spot like this, but is there any way to access or get some guidance from you on that process as far as that spreadsheet or anything like that?
Oh, the little cheat sheet that I have.
Or do you have any podcasts that you put out that we could link?
Yeah, we have a video on our YouTube channel that talks about flying over people. It's actually a very popular video. I think it's got 400,000 views or something. You can pretty easily find it. Yeah, before you fly over anyone, just watch that video, and then yeah, because we actually did testing. We tested the Mini, and we hit human-like skin to see if it would cause laceration. I hate to say what we use. We use a pig's foot, which is in the medical world. That's what they use to do testing on doing like stitching. And I've talked to a bunch of people, and they said that's the closest to human skin that you will find. So we flew a Mini 2 into a bunch of pig legs and saw what kind of lacerations we got, and we made a video out of it. And the results were basically a Mini 2 without prop guards is going to cause some laceration. And so you should have prop guards on top of it. And I can only imagine if you hit somebody in the face, the skin is really thin on the face. So you definitely get laceration if you hit someone without prop guards. So yeah, fly safely. The category 1, by the way, is a self-approved drone. You don't need the FAA to say this is a category 1 drone. You decide if the drone is category 1. So as long as it meets all the requirements, some people say, well, the Mini 1 or Mini 2 doesn't cause laceration, so I'm going to just fly it as a category 1. And I have to disagree with that, but that's up to you to decide if it caused laceration or not.
Oh, and I can just envision your team out there doing these tests.
We had to put a sock at the bottom of the foot because it looks so just creepy. So we put a little sock at the bottom so people couldn't tell what it was, and we never really said what it was. But if you watch it, you'll understand what I'm talking about.
Well, we'll definitely want to get that link out there. That's fun. So let's diverse a little bit and talk a little bit about the team. Share about your team. And I know when I first met you in person, that was one of the things I asked. Tell me about diversity and some of the women that you have on your team.
Yeah, you bet. We have about a dozen employees now at Pilot Institute, some remote, some working in the office. And we have 3 women now working for us. We actually have one person who's remote, who's our flight instructor, so airplane. We plan and drone training, and she lives in Alaska actually, and she does training. She was one of my students at Embry-Riddle when I was a professor there. And then we actually have another Embry-Riddle student who's helping us with admin work. We send stickers to people, free stickers for your drone. That's something that we offer, and then she's actually in charge of that program and making sure that it runs smoothly. And then and I have my executive assistant is also in the building and helping me daily to make sure that I stay on top of things and that I show up on meetings on time and do a lot of the admin work for me as well. Very, very critical position.
Well, I'm glad she got you here to this session today.
Yep.
So when you say stickers, I believe you had at one time, and I don't know if you still are, you had a promotional where you were, if someone had given you their FAA number for their drone, you would send them a sticker on it. So are you still doing that?
Yep. Yeah, we've reached over 20,000 stickers that we've sent to the community for free. This was, I just put a link in the description here in the chat. This is a process that we started to bring awareness to the fact is only $5 and it can only be done on the FAA website. We got so many students, unfortunately, that get roped into paying $50, $60, $70 for their registration using websites that pretended to be the FAA, that we decided to do something about it. And this is something that we give back to the community. And unfortunately, these websites, very often they use the fact that they give you stickers and then they rope you into getting stickers and a registration done for $60, which is just absolutely outrageous. So we decided to do a campaign where we give, and we were going to give only 10,000 of them, and we've way surpassed that. So we're just going to keep doing it forever at this stage, and just help the community make sure that they don't get roped into things they shouldn't.
And I've seen the stickers. They're nice stickers, are great size, and
Yep.
it helps everybody to be compliant, right? And then when we have Diana on here, she'll be happy with us all. And we
Yeah,
can
it's
share.
it's got your number on it, it's got your phone number on it, it's got your registration and then the expiration date as well. So as soon as you look at your drone, how if your registration is expired or not. So it's a one look looking at the drone, and then if you lose your drone, your phone number is on there, so people can find it and call you. We actually had somebody call us, send us a message not too long ago because our name is on the sticker, and the sticker get damaged during a crash, and they found a crash drone, and then there was a few digits of the phone number they couldn't read. So, but they saw our name on it, and they said, "Well, can you find who it belonged to?" So we were able to contact the person and then say, "Hey, we found your drone," and then put them in contact with each other, and then they were able to find their drone. So that's a great story.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And so I know we have a bunch of questions that are popping up into the chat. While we're on the subject of that crash, can you tell me a little bit about, I had seen something you had made a comment about, that there's a reporting process for the FAA, which many of us are familiar with, but there's also a reporting process for NTSB, and some people may not be familiar with that part. Can you share that a little bit?
Yep, NTSB 830. So the NTSB also wants to know when certain things happen to your drone. I'm not going to lie, I don't remember it from the top of my head right now. I would have to look at my slides. But if you go to NTSB 830, the information is there. We actually also did a video on this on YouTube, in the YouTube channel, so you can go and research, what things you need to report to who. We actually had a real life example of that knowledge being very important. One of our big customers, they have a lot of different pilots that fly all over the place, and one of them get into an accident where they get injured, and injured to the point where they had to go to the hospital for several days. And so they reached out to us and they said, "What do we need to do as a company to make sure that we're compliant?" And so we went back and we looked at all the regulation to make sure we were giving them the right advice. But the bottom line is they had to report it to the the FAA. They had to report it to the NTSB, and they were very grateful that they knew all that stuff because, well, you can get in trouble if you don't do it the right way, and especially with the NTSB, it's not a regulation that a lot of people know. And but yeah, NTSB 830, that's where the regulation lives. You can find more information there.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Let's head over to our chat and address some of the questions that have popped up. I'm going to start where I think I left off, which would be with Bill Johnson. And he has asked about how do you foresee the intersection of drones into the world of advanced air mobility?
That's a great question, Bill. This is something I've been watching closely, quite frankly, because I believe that well, with the training that we provide training for airplane and for drone pilots. I believe urban air mobility is right at the intersection of that. And this is something I have a lot of interest in. I think we're going to see a lot more urban air mobility in the next 10 years. I think people want to say 5 years, but I'm going to be a bit more realistic. I'm going to say 10 years. The reason I'm saying 10 years is because I think the FAA is going to slow down the process a little bit. Nothing against the FAA, but they move at the speed of government. So I think we'll see some regulation pushback from the FAA, because just like they did with drones, they don't know where urban air mobility fits in with existing regulation. The former FAA administrator mentioned that they would not create new regulation for urban air mobility because there are some framework that are available at the moment. I don't fully believe in that. I think they're going to find themselves having to create something different because that current regulation doesn't encompass everything that's going to be done with UAM. So I think it's going to be interesting. I'm kind of excited about it, quite frankly. I'm excited about it for several reasons, but primarily from a first responder perspective. I would love to be able to see urban air mobility, a small drone or a large drone, let's put it this way, that can carry one person from the scene of an accident and fly them back straight to the hospital without having to get a helicopter involved, not putting somebody's life at risk, by having a large aircraft trying to land on the side of a road to get somebody. If you have a smaller drone that can do that and carry people to the hospital directly, I think that's the perfect use for air mobility. And then transportation of organs and things like that, which we do already with drones, but I think we can scale it up to a much bigger size. And yeah, all these things I think are great possibilities for that sphere.
What a vision of the future. It'll
Mhm.
be here before we even know it, right?
Yep. Yep.
So we have another question that comes from Michelle. And what are your thoughts on the new green UAS framework?
That's a tough one. There's been a lot of comments in the industry amongst people on the green initiative. If you're not familiar, there's the blue UAS, which was approved by the Department of Interior, I want to say, which allows certain types of drone to be approved to be flown by the government. The problem is that these meeting those standards is very difficult, and some smaller companies just don't have the ability to do the paperwork or to do the R&D, the research and development for this kind of drone. So AUVSI created this green initiative, Green UAS, which is a similar standard to Blue UAS, but just a little bit easier to achieve, and would give the ability to some manufacturers, smaller manufacturers possibly, to get access to that classification, if you want, and be able to sell their drones to the federal government. So I think from a civilian perspective, for you and I that fly our drones just on a day-to-day basis, that doesn't have any impact, quite frankly, or a small impact, I should say. It may have an impact in the sense that having access to those federal contracts for smaller manufacturers can allow them to create better drones for us on the consumer side, but that's a bit of a stretch. I think we see a lot of companies now that are switching to creating a government drone rather than creating consumer drones, because the consumer world is very competitive and cutthroat. So I'm always optimistic, but yeah, we'll see what happens with that.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that part with us. So there's a lot of comments into our chat, and thank you. Hector got his decals. Carolyn, who I don't know if she's even on here today. That was the first time I saw the decals, and she had those quite a while ago. And so also thank you for the clear and direct commentary on remote ID and flying over people. There's a lot of comments in here about flying over people, and there is a lot of confusion on it. And so very glad that you had some clarification there. Can you share a little bit about transitioning over people versus hovering or stationary, staying there?
Yep. So bottom line is, anytime you want to fly over people, whether you're transitioning or you are hovering, you need a categorized drone. So the difference is in the category 1, 2, or 3, there are different restrictions as to whether you can hover or not. And that's as complicated as I'm going to make it, because at the moment, there's no other drones that are really approved to fly over people. The most restrictive is category 3. So you can fly over people, but there's a lot of restriction. You have to be in an enclosed area, for example, where people are on notice, so they know that there's a drone flying over them. So it doesn't apply to a lot of things. And then flying over moving vehicles also requires a categorized drone, and you need to follow all the rules for flying over people plus additional rules to fly. So I see some people sometimes say, hey, I can transition. I know I'm allowed now to transition over a road. And I said, yes, as long as you have a categorized drone. And that's the big caveat that a lot of people miss. They just saw the headline on some article somewhere and they say, oh, we can fly over people now. Yes and no. And mostly no, because you need a categorized drone.
I foresee a class in itself just being offered as in, here's the details of remote ID categorizing drones.
That's what that video on YouTube, that's why it's so popular, because we talk about all the different aspects and all the different categories. It's a complex topic. It's just a complex topic.
It is. Yeah, so circling back to the chat, thank you, Sheila, for answering. Yes, this will be recorded and put onto the Women in Drones YouTube channel. It does take a little while. Big shout out to Johnny, because he does this in his free time for us. Thank you, Johnny. We also have Go Embry Riddles. We have an alumni here with us. Olga mentioned that the Latino community needs support. I got a couple loves on that one. And so back to the stickers, got our stickers. And shout out to you, an excellent instructor. And make sure that I have covered everything in here. Are there usable drones on the blue list right now?
Ooh, well, that's a tough question. Most of the drones on the blue list right now, I'm going to make a personal statement, I think are far inferior to some of the drones we see on the consumer side. And most of the time at a sticker price that's 3 or 4 times what you see on the consumer side. So I personally believe the Blue UAS program was a bit of a failure. The DOT and the DOJ, I'm sorry, I think it's from the Department of Justice. They came up with the Blue UAS 2.0, which added more manufacturers. The initial batch only had 5 manufacturers. Some of them didn't really survive even after this. They came up with a new list with the 2.0, and I think that has more drones on here that are a bit more useful. And all of these are pretty niche in a sense. So you got to really make sure that if you pick one of these drones, that you really absolutely need it. And I know some people that do contracting work for the government, they need to have those drones. So, and then it's a tough program. It's a tough program.
Bill said thank you for the AAM and elaborating on that. And Teresa has a interesting story in here about how to transport eyeballs via Jetstream aircraft Philly to Baltimore. When I landed, the medical personnel met at the aircraft and asked, where are they? The eyeballs. And behind the ice in the front seat. And so, interesting story she wanted to share.
It's always good to have an extra set of eyeballs when you fly an aircraft.
That it is. Does that work for a VO? Right?
Right.
Oh, all right. So that's a really good segue to another topic, FPV and a VO. So sometimes there's some confusion of when a VO is necessary or not, and is it mandatory for a VO? Can you share a little bit more on that?
Yep. So VOs are not required unless you're flying FPV. That's really the easiest way that I can put it. So if you're flying FPV, whether you're flying recreationally or you are flying under Part 107, you need to have a VO with you. There are slightly different rules under recreational versus flying under Part 107. And the reason is because the VO usage is guided by the CBO guidelines under recreational rules. So the FAA has 9 sets or 8 rules, basic rules for flying recreationally, and one of them is you have to follow community-based organization guidelines. And under those, they added a bunch of new rules, including the VO, visual observer usage for FPV. And so each CBO has a slightly different take on it, but most of them match what's under Part 107, which is you need to have a drone. You need to have, you need a drone. You need to have a VO that's located, that's in communication with the pilot, okay? And make sure that both the pilot and the visual observer have the ability to see the drone at all times. And this is something that always gets confusing for people. The regulation is 107.31, and the regulation is extremely confusing the way that it's written. But it says that when you're using a VO, the pilot needs to be able to always see the aircraft, which means that if you're using goggles, if you remove the goggles at all times, anytime you remove the goggles, you need to be able to see where the aircraft is located, okay? And then it says also in the regulation that at all times, somebody needs to be able to see the aircraft, needs to see the aircraft. So a portion of it says be able to see, and the other one says see the aircraft. So I hear some people sometimes that says, well, I put my VO a mile away and I'm using FPV. Well, that doesn't work because at all times, both of you need to be able to see the drone. If you remove your goggles as the pilot, you need to be able to see them, but also your VO needs to be able to see the drone at the same time. So it gets confusing. The best thing that you can do in most cases is have your VO located pretty close to you, or have a radio that you can use. That's under Part 107, a radio that you can use to talk to them, but at all time you need to be able to see that. So 107.31 is difficult to interpret and understand, but that's kind of the long answer on VOs.
And I keep throwing these questions at you, and you're like, well, there's a curveball. That wasn't on our list there. So,
It's all good.
I said you were the subject matter expert, right?
Oh, I can talk about drones all day long.
So also, I think you mentioned something that is really key, is you can't have your VO a quarter of a mile away. They have to be there within communication range, correct?
They have, well, the key is this. The key is that you need to make sure that the VO at all time has the ability to see the drone. So wherever they're located, if they're a mile away and you see the drone, chances are they can't see the drone at the same time. So that doesn't work. And if they can see the drone, then you as a pilot won't be able to see it either. So that doesn't work either. That's against the regulation. Now, under recreational rules, they have added that the VO needs to be co-located, but that's only under recreational rule. So it says that the VO has to be co-located. So if you're flying recreationally, make sure that VO is right next to you when you fly. Under Part 107, that's not the case. But at the end of the day, it's mostly the same thing. We did a flight one time to kind of test the theory and test the regulation, and we had someone sitting on top of a hill that was by a park where we were flying, and at all time that VO could actually see the airspace because there was an airport nearby, and then the pilot could also see the drone at all times. So that worked really well, but we were using radios because they were far enough that they couldn't just talk. So we were using radio to talk to each other, and that worked out really well. So you got to be a little creative with the use of VO, but you got to remember the bottom line of what the regulation says and wants you to do.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we had another comment in the chat regarding the blue UAS was intended. Don't believe. No, they didn't believe it. The blue UAS was intended to be exclusive. Once a list was created, it was singled out as a solution for a problem it wasn't intended to solve. Yeah, so
Yep.
and I know that name actually refers to Tawny, so thank you, Tawny. Michelle has another great question in here. Can you share some industry trends that you've been noticing? Is it more individual operators versus enterprise? And once again, my chat goes off the screen, so it's hard for me to see the whole thing, so I apologize.
That's okay. I see it. I see the rest of it here. What industry seems to be growing fastest? That's a great question. I think the fastest growing industry right now, I'm going to have to say, is the inspection sector, whether it's inspecting houses or inspecting power lines, but we see a lot of demand for the inspection world. As far as individual operators versus enterprise, I would say it's still more individual operators at the moment, but we do have at Pilot Institute a lot of big contracts with big enterprise teams that are building their team as well. Maybe more than we've seen before, because I think industries or companies are starting to realize the use of drones and what they can do with it. So they reach out to us to help them with the training, more than before for sure. But I still think there's more individual operators than they are team or company operators. There were 55 or 60,000 new pilots last year that were created, and I think we're close to 300,000 remote pilots now since the beginning of Part 107.
Like those numbers. All right, Bill has another question about flying indoors and do they need to follow FAA regulations? And what he was specifically referring to was a large covered arena.
Yep. So no, anything that's indoors that has a roof. So if you're flying in an arena that's covered, then the FAA doesn't have any regulation in there. But I'm going to add a caveat to this. If you decide to fly in there, your insurance company is still going to want to have a say into how you operate. And so because the FAA doesn't have regulation, chances are if you have an insurance company, if you have an insurance policy with someone, make sure that you talk to them about what you can and cannot do indoors, because they may not cover you for flying over people, for example, indoors. So you need to know what your limitations are, because if something happens, it's always about the if, right? You can do whatever you want, anywhere you want, until something happens and stuff hits the fan. And then you have to explain why you did what you did. And the insurance company might not be happy with it and not cover you. So talk to your insurance about what you can and can't do inside.
All right, yes, insurance. Definitely a key factor.
Yep.
I know we're running out of time. We have about 10 minutes coming up to the top of the hour here. And so I do want to use a time to answer a couple more questions. I want to circle back actually to, you were just discussing flying under the rules of Part 107 versus as recreational and being a CBO. So often I have seen that when you're flying as a recreational pilot, you don't even know what CBO regulations that you're flying under and what are those rules. And now we have choices.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Yep.
So,
now we have four CBOs.
and so now it's easier to go and find some of that information, but that is one of the key things, is that you need to know what are their specific rules that they want you to be flying under to be compliant. And so,
Yep.
So as we get ready to segue up to the top of the hour, a couple more things that I wanted to ask from you was, what about model releases? Do we need one for flying with showing people in our imagery? Or what about property? Do we need some sort of a release for property?
That's a bit of a tough one because I'm pretty sure it depends on each of the states that you're flying in. So I would say, and this is a tough thing to answer because you want to make sure you do it correctly. I would say reach out to an attorney and have them draft a release model, a model release form for you, just to make sure that and you might spend 70 to $100 to do this. They probably have a template. You might even be able to use LegalZoom to do this because they're a little bit more affordable. And this is a pretty cookie cutter kind of thing. But I would say spend the money and do the research on what you need to do for your specific state. Because, well, it's a touchy subject, especially with drones, because we see drones being under attack in a lot of states, including the states where I live, Arizona, where they're trying to pass regulation that would prohibit somebody from flying over somebody's house and recording footage over somebody's house, even if it's in the backyard, which is a whole different can of worms. But be careful when you do that kind of stuff, and make sure that you know the regulation in your state. And hiring somebody that knows what they're doing is usually worth its pound of gold, quite frankly.
And look into the specific state. Every state is different. Hector asked a question in here about remote ID, and circling back to that remote ID, when it goes into effect, how can people track your drone and the information that's being reported? And are they going to need an app specific to find that information? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yep. So there's a difference between what the FAA wanted to do with remote ID and what I think is going to happen in real life with remote ID. So the concept is that the drone sends the information. Anybody on the ground that has a cell phone with the correct app is going to be able to identify and collect and read information that's coming from the drone, right? And that's the serial number of the drone, the altitude location of the drone, the altitude location of the pilot, and then an emergency status message, and then a timestamp. That's the remote ID message. That's what's being sent. So if you have the correct app, if you have the correct phone, then you'll be able to get that data. Now, in real life, and then this is something that I think not everybody's thought about before they made regulation for remote ID, but in real life, what's happening is that Apple doesn't allow app developers to use the functionality that would scan for a Wi-Fi signal. So your drone needs to be able to scan for a Wi-Fi signal and collect the data that's coming from a drone, and then put that into an app. Well, it turns out Apple doesn't allow you to do that. And so at the moment, the only cell phones that can collect remote ID data and receive remote ID data from a drone are Android phones. And we don't know that Apple will ever allow app developers to receive that data. So for all the people that are worried about somebody finding your location as you fly your drone and coming to steal your drone, which I'm worried about for other people, especially this is a women drone meeting, right? And we have women that are going to be flying by themselves in areas that, put you as a target. I don't like that. And so the solace in all this is that half the phones out there may not even be able to capture that data. So, and then the other thing, and that's the difference between the theory and the real life, is that the signal that's being sent from the drone doesn't go very far, which means that a couple 100 feet away, and you may not even be able to collect the data from a phone. So if your drone is flying at 400 feet, chances are nobody's going to be able to see what it's doing. So it's a balance, right? We want that technology because we want to find the bad guys that are flying the drones around and know that there's a drone flying there. But on the other hand, as an operator, you want to make sure that you don't become a target. And so at this stage, only a few months away from remote ID being released, we don't have all that data.
So key points, very, very key points. Bill's gonna jump off. I know we're right up at the top. Usually we've cut off by now, but the conversation has been so great. We're just going, right? So
I just talk a lot.
we will wrap it up. As far as, okay, Dennis has a question in here. We'll address that. And then I've got one last one for you. And he was asking about, can people hack the drone? By what
No, not from remote ID. I mean, not from remote ID. If think about remote ID as being simply the Wi-Fi router that you have in your house that is sending you Wi-Fi to all your devices wirelessly. That's what your drone is. It's a Wi-Fi router that's just sending a signal. There's no connection with the way that you control the drone. That's a completely different connection. Now, can other people use different technology to take over your drone? The answer is yes. For certain drones, yes, they have the ability to take over your drone, but not a widespread kind of thing. It's pretty difficult still. And then some of the connections are very secure these days, especially on the Autel drones and even the DJI drones, that the average Joe can't do it. If anybody's going to take over your drone, it's probably going to be some 3-letter government agency because you're in the wrong place and they want you to go away. So that's the only time I would worry about that. But otherwise, no, remote ID is just a signal being sent. There is no real control between the two.
Okay, awesome. Let me see if this is, does remote ID specs call out what the distance of the drone or add the module might be able to receive from? No.
Nope. It doesn't say. It does. There's no limit. There's no minimum distance that it needs to send a signal.
Okay, all right. So I want to wrap up with one last question here because I know we're getting up at the top of the hour, and it's all about Pilot Institute. What do you see as a future for Pilot Institute? What great things do you have on the horizon?
Well, we have a lot of cool things around the corner. More courses for sure. We're creating more courses this year, like we did last year and the year before and the year before. Also more airplane courses. We're spending a lot of time on getting airplane content done these days as we're growing the team. So we just added 4 new team members into the team, and we're gonna keep creating awesome content. Also, we're testing a lot of new ways to teach things, which is pretty exciting. We have virtual reality stuff that's around the corner, not on the drone side at the moment, but on the airplane side, we're creating some really cool virtual reality models where you'll be able to not fly an airplane, but pre-flight an airplane. So you'll be able to put the goggles on and walk around your house and learn what different parts of the airplanes do. We're trying to make flight training more affordable for people, which is a lifelong goal for me because flight training is extremely expensive. We see fewer people getting into the field, and that's good for the drone industry as well, quite frankly. So the more people we get on board on the drone side, the more they want to fly airplanes, and we have a lot of people converting to doing that once they catch the bug. So yeah, just more cool stuff coming from us, more content. Our production team is growing as well, so we are putting more videos now on YouTube and in the courses. So just more.
I definitely look forward to that virtual reality. I absolutely love that aspect. I love doing the Oculus and such like that.
Yep.
So, and I know I said that was my last question, but that led me down another rabbit hole, of course. And so one of my STEM students was very much wanting to get involved with a higher learning process of aviation, being that she wants to become a private pilot or at least do the ground school. And so on the STEM side, do you have things that you are working on as far as on the STEM side of things?
Yep, we are. I truly believe that we need to teach kids to to fly drones first. That's extremely important, but also to use drones to learn how to code. Okay, and because those skills are skills that we're going to need in the future. So what we're doing is we're creating a course that's going to help kids teach drones how to fly, and that's going to allow them to code and learn to code in the process as well. And that's something that we can do for, and I say kids, I say young kids to even older kids, high school kids, and then give them the ability to do some really cool stuff using drones. So it's kind of accomplishing two different things at the same time, right? And just exposing them. I think in general in this country we've done well, we've done a poor job with STEM in general. I know there's a lot of people involved in STEM now trying to make it better, which is awesome. But over the last decade, you know, I taught at the university level, and I saw the lack of interest or even the lack of knowledge that we gave our kids when they were younger. So I'm excited to see all the programs everywhere, you know, that bring STEM back into the schools and get kids more excited about science and technology.
Oh, I agree 100%. And just building a brighter future for aviation as a whole is just
Yep.
key.
Yep.
Well, I thank you. We are literally at the top of the hour. So if anybody had to jump off for another one, you better run, right? Greg, I can't thank you enough. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge with us. And I just appreciate the time that you have given us today. So I know you're a very busy person, and yes, we have a lot of thank yous going into our chat there. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks for all the great questions. Always love talking, as you can tell. So,
Well, thank you so much. All righty, you have a wonderful day. Thank you, everybody, and we will see you next week. All right,
awesome.
have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.
That kind of wraps it up.